So, has anyone here ever had like a glass of wine? I'm sure many of you have. I'm sure many of you not. uh, and I just want you to think of what do you think of wine when you do? Is it just like, you know, this drink that you have at a party or with dinner, or is it just a drink of choice? Or do you drink it because it's like a glass a day, you know, keeps the doctor away or something like that? Well, today I'm going to talk about how you actually make wine. And you might ask, what does this, you know, kid in our class have to do with making wine? And, well, I grew up in Napa Valley. Napa Valley, if you don't know what it is actually very famous for making wine. And it was in May 24th, 1976, that Stag's Leap Wine Cellars actually beat a French wine with a grape from the same province. It was in Cabernet. And you can look that up on their website, Stag's Leap Wine Cellars. And you know, I've also made wine with my dad for several years, and I've also worked at a winery for the past 2 summers. Now let's get into actually making the wine. So I'm going to talk about 6 steps of making the wines. First, before you even pick the grape and what you need to look for. Second, I'm going to talk about actually picking the grapes. Third, the crushing and destemming process. Fourth, the fermentation process, probably the most important. And then the aging process, and then finally bottling. So when I talk about, you know, before picking the grapes and why is this important, you know, there's a sugar in the grape, and this sugar is called brisk, and you want to make sure you have about 24 to 28% brisk level in your grape, and you check, you know, different vines and use something called a refractometer. And then, so after you know, search your vineyards and be like, okay, we have a good brisk level, you want to pick the grapes, and best time to pick grapes in the morning. So when you pick the grapes, not much to it. It's cut it off the vine and put it in the container. But to give you an aspect of how much grapes per, like, you know, bottle of wine, it takes about half a ton of grapes for 1 barrel of wine, and that creates about 25 cases. That's around 300 bottles. A lot of wine. And then, you know, after we do this, we have our grapes, and in my case, you know, you go home with them, and you know, you put them in a crushing and destemming machine. And this machine, what it does is it doesn't like squish the grape and all the juice out of it. No, all it does is it takes out the stem and it breaks open the berry. And this is what we create something called musk. So that's what we call it. And this is when you're going to add the yeast. This is where the fermentation process actually starts, and it starts making the wine itself. The brisk level is the sugar that the yeast eats and makes the alcohol. And once the brisk is gone, it's the end of the first stage of fermentation. Now, this is when you actually squeeze the grapes, you know, get all the juices out, and this is when it's like actually wine. Now, the second stage of fermentation, you add a special yeast that it eats up something called lactic acid, or sorry, malic acid, and it turns it into lactic acid. Malic acid is what's responsible for tart tastes in fruits and juices and stuff, and lactic acid is actually a chemical your body uses. It's one of the reasons why wine is actually good for you. You can look this up on healthwine.com, and I got from wisegeeks.org. And so, you know, after this second stage is done, it's wine. This is your final product. You can drink it right out of the barrel if you want. But there's another important aspect, which is the next step, the aging process. And the aging process, you have it sit in a barrel, or if you buy like box wine, they keep it in metal containers. But you have it, and for the most part, It's in a wooden barrel, and it actually takes flavor from the oak. And this softens the wine. It gives it more of a smell. It, it just gives it more of a texture and everything. After a year or two of sitting in a barrel, you bottle the wine. Before I finish up, I'd like to thank my dad also for helping me get some information on the speech, and Robert Clint and his book on homemade winemaking. After that, just remember the 6 steps is check the sugar levels before picking, and then pick your grapes, crush, destem them, and fermentation, age, and bottle. Thank you very much.